Mallorca's limestone is hewn into a variety of landscapes, rugged cliffs and abrupt slopes sweeping straight down into the sea. In the middle of the island lies a vast plain, covered in fertile earth deposited by the sea and enriched over thousands of years by river alluvium. In the northwest mountain range lies the island's biggest mountain, Puig Major, the highest point in the Balearic Islands at over 1,440 meters high. Thanks to its varied natural environment, the island boasts a wide range of plant life. Aside from the succulents typical of the Mediterranean climate, many plants, usually found in temperate regions, have adapted to this often windswept island. Thousands of birds stop over in Majorca on their migration routes. The island's strategic position did not escape the notice of the Carthaginians and their enemies, the Romans. After a long period of Muslim rule, Majorca was seized by the Catalans, and in the mid-14th century became part of Spain. Since 1983, the Balearic Islands have been an autonomous community, assimilated into the Kingdom of Spain. Over the centuries, Majorca has undergone many foreign influences. Yet it has preserved its own identity. A few communities are scattered across the central plain, without encroaching upon the agricultural land. In the mountainous parts, the villages are tiny, avoiding the steep slopes and blending into the landscape. The Balearic Islands boast a population of 1 million, and 80% of them live on Majorca. Despite the demographic growth, the island has remained close to its roots. The architecture draws a line between past and present. It's a hodgepodge of influences, marrying Moorish curves with Modernismo, the Spanish version of Art Nouveau. The Christian religion predominates. It may be Catholic or even Orthodox, a legacy of the Byzantine period. Religious conviction has impregnated tradition. Thus, Easter festivals are fervently celebrated. The Christian faith and its numerous expressions feed most of the island's popular traditions. Beautiful souls produce physical beauty. It's an abiding feature on an island whose light has attracted many artists. And not just any artist. Salvador Dali, Pablo Picasso, Juan Miró. Pieces of art are so important that even the roundabouts have room for them in their center. The island has become a very active artists' club. Following on from the three great 20th century Spanish masters, a host of artists have moved here. The colors and shapes inspire them, and they find on the island a way to blend sun and art. In Majorca, artistic creation has retained a common touch. The declining farming industry has opted for quality over quantity. It's a good policy, and over the last few years, almond production has seen the benefits, along with olives and especially citrus fruit. The management of water resources owes a lot to the Muslim irrigation techniques. For a long time, water served by the rich earth was the only source of wealth. In days gone by, 65% of the population lived off the land. Agriculture now accounts for only 2% of gross domestic product. The appeal of rural produce has been developed. Since Spain joined the European Union, restrictions have undoubtedly been tightened. But by carefully selecting breeds of cattle and returning to traditional methods, new markets have opened up, as evidenced by the success of small-scale producers. The flavors of traditional cuisine have been rediscovered, Salted, smoked, dried, or immersed in oil, the produce is preserved as in the days before refrigeration. Since time immemorial, Majorca has been searching for means of subsistence. As the islanders exploited the dominant winds, dug the soil deep, or worked the salt marshes. In ancient times, salt extracted from the island was famous throughout the Mediterranean. Majorca harnesses hydroelectricity for its energy production. Because of its remote location, the island cannot rely upon high-tech industry. The industrial sector's contribution to gross domestic product continues to diminish. By way of contrast, some activities are prospering, such as the production of pearls or blown glass. Commercial trade is facilitated by an excellent network of roads, which is both dense and modern. The lie of the land, however, does the traffic infrastructure no favors. Numerous structures have had to be built to facilitate road connections hindered by the landscape. Incessant air traffic has made Majorca Airport the third busiest in Spain, handling over 20 million passengers a year. New technologies and the rapid development of telecommunications have dragged Majorca out of its isolation and contributed to development. But the sector that has boosted the economy most is obviously tourism, providing the island with 70% of its revenues. Thanks to tourism, the rate of unemployment in the Balearic Islands is markedly lower than the national average. Sunshine, scenery and affordable prices have accounted for the island's popularity as a holiday venue since the 1960s. But mass tourism aside, Majorca offers other modes of access. Visitors can enjoy the island's heritage and nature. Authentic values in harmony with an island bathed in sunshine and art. The city, formerly known as Medina Mallorca, was for 500 years a Muslim stronghold. Its zenith came with the Catalans, who christened it Ciutat de Mallorca, a name kept until the 18th century. Palma's influence spread throughout the Mediterranean. But its expansion was cut short by the discovery of America. Resources were poured into transatlantic expeditions and the port sank into obscurity. The architecture reflects the town's many different eras. Despite a lengthy Muslim presence, relatively few traces of their occupation remain, save for the ancient residence of the Moorish viziers, the fortress palace of Al-Mundaina. The imposing cathedral alone contains centuries worth of history. In the gardens around the cathedral, artists have found another territory in which to express themselves. Majorca astonishes by its boldness and assortment of shapes and styles. Monk or statue? Appearances can be deceptive. The cathedral is erected on the site of a former mosque. Its construction was settled in the 13th century by the King of Aragon. He had ridden out a storm at sea and promised to build a church in honor of the Virgin if he survived. The king didn't live to see the finished edifice, as the work took 371 years to complete. Its use of light and Baroque decoration give the cathedral a special place in the hearts of Mallorcans. It is known as La Seu, which means Episcopal Center in Catalan. Every year, the Lledanya is produced, a kind of cross made from wax to ensure a good harvest. It accompanies the procession organized for Corpus Christi. For the occasion, the caballettes are given an outing. These cardboard horses are used in several Majorcan festivals, and their origins date back to the Middle Ages. The cavalcade evokes the clash between the Christians and Muslims. In a religious context, the caballettes represent the fight between good and evil. The old town is straight out of the Middle Ages. The houses take up as little room as possible. Indeed, there was a shortage of space within the old city walls that surrounded the city until the 19th century. The larger mansions, though, had plenty of space, with the living area always on the upper floors, arranged around a patio. Once the risk of conflict had subsided, the aristocracy abandoned their fortified palaces. By the 18th century, they preferred the comfort of more luminous residences, such as the Palace of March, now a center for contemporary Spanish art. Juan March was the head of a huge fortune amassed by smuggling. In the 1950s, he created a foundation which still bears his name. Once the ramparts had been dismantled, the city began to take on a different look. Long, rectilinear roads flanked by higher, more spacious buildings sprang up. It was time for town planners to bring new scope to the city. The cramped medieval surroundings had to be dispensed with. A tour de force of symmetry, the Plaça Major is a Baroque masterpiece. Over the last 200 years, architects have given full rein to their creativity to satisfy the tastes of their wealthy clientele. Every kind of influence converges on the walls in a dazzling mixture of lines, moldings, friezes, and bas-reliefs. Art Nouveau emerged in many European countries in the late 19th or early 20th centuries. Plant motifs were carved in stone, glass, wood, and metal. The outskirts of Palma are prized locations for summer residences. This was true even in the 14th century, when the Castel de Bellver was built for vacationing Majorcan kings. The name Bellver means beautiful view. All around Palma, the plant life reasserts itself, invading the gardens of a typical 17th century Majorcan house. The walls are covered in charcoal drawings by one of the 20th century's leading artists, Juan Miró. The Pilar and Juan Miró Foundation bears the name of the artist and his wife. It was set up in 1981 around the workshops used by Miró when he was living in Majorca. The Barcelona-born painter spent his vacations on the island before settling here permanently at the age of 63 to live out the last years of a life devoted entirely to art. Miró's sculptures assimilate into an ensemble showcased by architecture. In the various foundations dedicated to the artist, works of art and buildings are one and the same thing. The foundation's director says it is to do with the island's environment.
Traditionally, when it comes to art, particularly contemporary art, the standard in Majorca is very high. The island has many galleries and works of art. Palma boasts more art galleries than any other town in Spain. It is said that Majorca has a passion for art and poetry. Maybe it's due to our environment. The rich landscape and tranquility of Mediterranean islands has inspired the creative urges of many artists.
Miró was drawn to Majorca.
From the Impressionist and Post-Impressionist period right up to the present day, Mallorca has been a refuge for artists from all over the world, as well as local artists. Obviously, when Miró got to know Mallorca, his interest for the island just grew and grew. Also, his wife, Pilar was a Mallorcan. He was keen to make Mallorca his home as the island naturally stimulated his artistic creativity.
Miró died here in 1983. After nightfall, Mallorca's center of gravity shifts along the coast. At the weekend, groups of young people gather for the botellón. They congregate to decide where they will finish the evening. Leaving Palma towards the east, the city fades into farmland. At the foot of the Serra di Tramontana, the mountain of the Tramontane, begins the vast plain that stretches to the center of the island. The Tramontane, a strong, dry, cool wind, often sweeps across it from the northwest. Countless windmills are scattered across the plain. Some pump groundwater to the surface. Some drive a millstone to mill grain. Clean, free and unlimited wind power has been harnessed on the island for hundreds of years. It's not known exactly when windmills first appeared on the island. Either way, good care is taken of them and they're well preserved. Without them, the Mallorcan plain would never have become the immense garden that stretched as far as the eye can see. Farming may be on the wane, but there's no question of abandoning such fertile soil. Whether for cereal or grazing, the earth here is blessed by the gods. But it is not all plain sailing. The soil may be fertile, but constant attention and a great deal of hard work is required to produce fruit. Despite the high-quality production, few young Mallorcans have a passion for farming. Many family properties are now sold due to a lack of vocation. On the market stalls, connoisseurs appreciate the wide range of charcuterie. But as the moist sea air is unsuitable for drying ham, cured meats are imported from mainland Spain. Alongside the pork products, Mallorca offers a variety of cow's milk and goat's milk cheeses. For some produce, such as citrus fruit, the island has competition from nearby North Africa. The farmers have had to adapt, and they grow the species best suited to their region, producing less in an attempt to rediscover natural flavors. The therapeutic benefits of medicinal plants are handed down from generation to generation. Nature has the answer to everything. Wine production almost disappeared from Mallorca in the 19th century with the curse of phylloxera, a parasitic aphid affecting vines. Local wines weren't relaunched until the 20th century. Water is sprayed to increase levels of humidity in the cellars. The quality of Mallorcan wine is widely recognized.
Mallorca has two appellations. Here it's Beni Salem. That's the oldest, with the vines extending over 5 municipalities. The other is called Pla de Llevate, found in the east of Mallorca. It's a much bigger region, and the wine they make there dates back to the days of the Roman Empire.
Glass has been blown in the Mediterranean basin since the dawn of time. On the island of Majorca, the reputation of glass craftsmen is firmly established. The blower first gathers molten glass onto the blowpipe before blowing into it to create volume. Using different techniques, the craftsman selects a shape to mold the glass into. Stretching the object lengthways requires centrifugal force. Glass is colored by adding powdered metals. Using their expertise in glass, Mallorcans have developed the manufacture of pearls. Mallorcan pearls is the generic term given to artificial pearls.
The glass rod melts at around 1200 degrees centigrade. A drop of molten glass is then dropped onto a rotating copper wire. As a result, the pearl automatically becomes round.
There are several stages to the process. How do balls of glass become pearls?
To become pearls, they are first removed before undergoing another process in which a pearly sheen is applied. For top-quality products such as ours, they receive 36 coats. The coating is made from fish scales and kaolin. All the processes we use are secret.
Mallorca has a worldwide reputation for the production of artificial pearls. Worn around the neck, the illusion is perfect. Across the plain lies the east coast. Access points are few and far between. Hence the attraction of the small ports still used by fishermen. Several East Coast ports were accessible during the Roman era. They still offer a peaceful mooring because they're sheltered by the Rio, a stretch of sea surrounded by land. People came here from inland to stock up on seafood. Along the coast, impressive caves are hewn out of the limestone. The cave is carpeted by a veritable forest of limestone concretions. They're reflected in the waters of Lake Martel, one of the biggest underground lakes in Europe. It bears the name of a French speleologist who explored the vicinity in the late 19th century. Traveling north from the middle of the island, the Serra de Levante heaves into view. Mallorca's second mountain range boasts more modest peaks. In the shade of the cypress trees, the Bethlehem Hermitage was founded in the early 19th century. Majorca boasts many such places that are perfect for solitude, prayer, and silence. From the Hermitage, there's an unrestricted view across the bay to the northeast of the island. The bay follows a wide curve sheltered from the ocean winds. This was the site chosen by the Phoenicians for Alcudia, the oldest city in Majorca. The walls protecting the old town were erected in the 14th century, after the Muslims had departed. Behind the walls, the various pages of Alcudia's history are written in the architecture, with the exception of the Roman period, traces of which may be found beyond the city walls. The city used to be the island's capital. A Roman bridge, the only one of its kind on Majorca, leads to the small town of Pollença. It was built during the Christian reconquest by the inhabitants of Alcudia, who were constantly under attack by pirates. They prayed as they mounted a long stone staircase known as Calvary Way, El Carrer del Calvari, which has as many steps as there are days in the year. Their prayers, though, were in vain, as Pollença too fell victim to pirates. The comfortable shelter afforded by Pollença Bay must have been very attractive to pirates. Nowadays, more peaceful activities are pursued there. Just above Pollença, the Serra de Tramuntana comes to an end. But it refuses to yield to the sea, extending into a long and rocky peninsula. It marks the extreme north of Majorca, forming the Cap of Formentor. At the island's extremity lies the port of Andratx. Only recently built dwellings scale the hills overlooking the port. The old city of Andratx was built slightly inland for fear of pirates. The road running along the northwest coast has to wend its way through the Serra de Tramuntana. The mountain leaves little room for traffic, as its rocks plunge brutally down into the sea. Along the coast, villages have no option but to cling to the contours. The communities huddle against the reassuring clock towers of their churches. The terraces make up a garden of vines at the seaside, as designated by the Arab name Banya Bulfa. The Muslims left Majorca some 8 centuries ago, and ever since, Christian kings have done their level best to erase all traces of their presence. But the Muslim influence is still discernible here. Olive trees can live for hundreds of years. Older trees can be recognized by their gnarled trunks. Even at an advanced age, they continue to produce fruit. In the gardens of the ancient monastery of Miramar, the olive trees were part of their heritage. Olives were pressed to obtain oil and thus meet the needs of a community founded in the 13th century. Also on the Miramar estate, one of the houses had an illustrious owner. It belonged to a member of the Sisi family, a relative of the Empress of Austria. The young lady who wandered the Mediterranean had a soft spot for her cousin Luis Salvador of Habsburg, owner of the property and aficionado of Majorca. Love has written a few beautiful pages in the history of Valldemossa. The village is prized by the wealthy families of Palma for its tranquility and coolness. Nothing could disturb the peaceful life of the locality. until the notoriety of a visitor changed the course of its existence. And yet the village wanted only to live peacefully in the shadow of the Charter House, founded by the disciples of St. Bruno in the 14th century. Carthusian monks have been around since the 11th century. They make up a contemplative order that thrives on silence and solitude. They also hold the secrets of plants, and their pharmacy reveals a keen knowledge of therapeutic preparations. The Carthusian monks amassed a great deal of learning here. But in the first half of the 19th century, religious orders were declared unwelcome in Majorca, and the monks were forced to leave Valldemossa, abandoning their belongings. The monks' austere cells devoted to renunciation and prayer were left almost intact. But the monks' departure didn't leave the Charter House deserted. For almost 2 months, it was home to a famous pair of lovers.
The Charter House is made up of different cells. 2 of them are rather special. They were rented by Frédéric Chopin and Georges Sand in the years 1838 and 1839. They spent here what's now known as a winter in Majorca.
Chopin hoped to benefit from the Mediterranean climate. Although the composer was already very sick, nothing could keep him from his work.
In these 2 cells, there are 2 pianos. One is the famous Majorcan piano on which Frédéric Chopin worked and composed music. The other is the Pleyel piano, ordered from the Pleyel company in Paris.
The second piano arrived a few days too late. The lovers had left the Charter House and Valldemossa before the return of spring. On the northwest coast, the port of Soyer enjoys protection from the mountains. In this well-sheltered bay, barely a ripple breaks the surface of the water. It's a spot where many yachtsmen choose to drop anchor, thanks to its innate sense of hospitality. Leaving the seaside resort is a little electric tramway into the hinterland. The tram goes back up the valley towards Soyer. It's known as the Golden Valley for the oranges on which its prosperity is based. After a 3-kilometer ride lasting 20 minutes, the tram arrives in Soyer. Long cut off from the rest of Majorca by the landscape, the locality has preserved its authenticity. Evidence of prosperity abounds all over Soyer. It has a monumental church erected in the 16th century using large blocks of hewn stone. After making their fortune, the fruit producers built themselves beautiful houses. They flaunted their success and their passion for art, a passion that still lives on in Soyer. Exhibited in a building adjoining the station is the work of Miró, along with many ceramics by Picasso. Picasso came to ceramics late in life. He was 65 when he began working terracotta in the south of France. The great Catalan made the most of what was regarded as a minor art form, producing thousands of pieces prior to his death. Around Sóller may be found the Serra di Tramontana's highest peaks. The rough limestone is ever present in this landscape, whether fashioned by man or not. But man has intervened in collecting rainwater from the sky. Man also found a way to cross the mountains. An enormous task not made any easier by nature. The road along the northwest coast is undoubtedly one of the most tortuous in the whole Mediterranean. In the heart of the vertiginous mountains, man made do with a modest opening. While on the other side, the Pareis waterfall has made a large opening in the sturdy rock, reaching the sea in the Sacalobra inlet. The Son Maroch residence was also the property of Louis Salvador of Austria. The Archduke's passion for the island lives on through music. Whether in Carrara marble or rocky limestone, Mallorca arouses artistic creation in all its forms.